Hello, everybody. I hope that everybody is hearing us right now. We're happy to see you all today here at our panel discussion about cloud versus on-premise. We're planning these events weekly, and you can join us, stay up to date, following us on social media and registering our events. And just a couple of words about Acure as organizer of this event. It is a cloud-based AIOps solution for the best observability, incident control, and event management. We're about to release our new version of the platform soon, so you can try it completely for free and tell us, do you like it or not? Because we're all about to hear your feedback. And if you have any questions, feel free to ask in the comments section right here on YouTube about platform and questions to our speakers. And I'm really excited to introduce our panelists. It's Marius Zaharia, Cloud Solution Architect and Principal Engineer at Societe Generale, Adam Arakelian, Senior Director of Engineering at Dell AMC, and Richard Simon, CTO Cloud Transformation at T-Systems International. Each speaker has a huge experience and an impressive background, and each of them is about to tell us about their approaches and their side they choose, like cloud versus on-premise versus hybrid. So we will hear a lot of great stuff today. And just a quick notice on our agenda, so everybody will be on one page. We will start with 5-minute speeches from each speaker, and after that we will dive into discussion and we will bring your question, which you wrote in our comment section, also to the discussion. So please don't hesitate and share your thoughts, your questions, everything you want in the comment section, and we can start. Okay, I would unmute our speakers, and let's start with Adam.
Sure.
Please tell us about it. Great, thank you. And you?
Good, thanks. Good, thanks. So, so when we think about cloud infrastructure and on-prem infrastructure, you know, in all honesty, it really depends on the use cases that we're trying to fulfill, right? Depending on which way to go, and there's no silver bullet per se, right? Whether you're jumping on an on-premise solution or a cloud infrastructure solution. I will say what we're beginning to see more and more of from working in Dell, we're beginning to see more and more of is where's your data, and the ability to obtain that information easily, and how you can manage that data in a easy, secure, reliable way. And so, like I said before, it depends on the set of use cases that you're trying to fulfill. But one thing that we've seen that's extremely prevalent in the industry today is the whole notion of multi-cloud. So a combination of both on-prem and off-prem, both infrastructure and data accessibility. And so when we begin to think about that, and if we realize that data is a key asset to organizations, you know, the whole notion of multi-cloud begins to make a ton of sense, not just from an infrastructure perspective or from an application perspective, but from a data perspective.
Yes. Yep. Yeah, I think we can go around with each opinion, and after that we'll dive into discussion, as I said. And maybe Richard, you can add something from your side.
Sure, yes. Well, hello, everybody. Welcome to, I just want to say welcome to all our audience. Yeah, it's a pleasure for me to be able to participate in this panel discussion on cloud versus on-prem. So as Kate said, I'm CTO for cloud transformation at T-Systems. T-Systems is the IT service arm of Deutsche Telekom. As you probably well know, Deutsche Telekom is the telco giant in Germany. So for me, I guess I'm kind of more in the cloud space, and that's kind of my really sort of specialization and forte. So I'll probably kind of defend cloud a little bit more in our discussion for today. And obviously, there's a number of reasons why you'd want to go to cloud. Just I usually kind of tend to start with some so-called scary stats, as I call them. So again, looking at the UK sort of market for cloud, the UK government spent I think 2.8 billion pounds on public cloud over the last year, I believe, these figures are from, I believe, from Gartner, and also in 2022, global spend was around $494 billion. So if you kind of put that into perspective, and that's growing into next year, the prediction is that will grow to around $600 billion next year. So if you kind of put that into perspective, that's all of the revenue from all the sort of data center vendors put together and more kind of combined into that figure. I mean, clouds, I do agree with Adam to an extent that cloud is not the kind of answer for everything, and there are certain types of workloads that either require specialization in their hardware or they are just kind of really there to be sweated as assets, and then kind of the customer can, the organization can move off of those particular platforms. So I think there is, yes, a case for sort of doing various things in the data center, or having like a hybrid solution. Again, my definition of multi-cloud is different from Adam's. Multi-cloud for me is multiple public clouds and not a hybrid cloud solution. Because if you're kind of doing data center and public cloud, I would call that a hybrid cloud solution. But point being is that, yes, there are kind of those types of workloads that do require that. Having said that, of course, we're seeing a lot more movement of those kind of specialized workloads into the cloud. We're seeing a lot more use of SAP, for example. That's kind of been a very staunch kind of platform for the data center, and we're seeing kind of all the public cloud providers embracing that. We're seeing a lot more of the kind of the heavy intensive sort of compute and calculation, so things like the sort of the ARM-based sort of processor technology is being introduced, and actually the likes of Amazon Web Services actually make their own processor for that, so they actually can offer those types of workloads and that type of infrastructure for customers who want to do things like high performance computing, HPC, and very kind of specialized type of stuff. So it's not there. I think it's kind of all that stuff is going to go in that direction. It's certainly not there, and yes, there are different potentially cases there. Why cloud for me, kind of generally very quickly, it's the shift really from sort of a capex sort of model, a capital expenditure model, to an operating expenditure model, to an OPEX model, and that kind of really frees up organizations to be able to focus on things like innovation, to being able to spin up services much more quickly, to be able to compete in their markets, and also the ability to fail fast. The data center and that kind of world is very much focused on resilience and high availability, and failure is not an option, and 5 nines kind of approach, whereas cloud really expects a failure. So you just need to kind of work out how you deal with that failure, and there's obviously multiple ways that you can actually do that, not just kind of different availability zones, but actually hardening your software, for example, using things like chaos engineering. That's another sort of innovation there. There's a lot of, I think, misunderstanding around security. My sort of take is that there's better security in the cloud, just simply because the public cloud providers are doing the security not just for you as a customer, but they do it for all of their customers, and also it's a very high grade sort of level of security as well. So they obviously deal with and have customers that are government agencies, and those government agencies, no matter who they are, the US, UK, or kind of worldwide, require certain levels of security that are specific to kind of their levels, and therefore, as a standard sort of organization that's selling various products or services or whatever, and you want to go into those public clouds, you actually gain from that advantage. You actually gain from the goodness that's actually been done for you in that level of security. the ability to scale is really important. In the data center, it's quite a difficult sort of process to do that. There's a number of different stages that are involved, everything from procurement to delivery to implementation, installation, configuration, testing, production, support, maintenance, upgrades, and patching. And I'm saying that in one breath. In the cloud, it's you kind of forego all of them, you bypass all of those earlier steps, and you just focus really on the development of your service and actually the provisioning of your service. And obviously there are tools that help you to scale that, and scaling out rather than up in the cloud, and that will help you to obviously be able to increase the demand, or if there is an increased demand, you can actually respond to that increased demand much more quickly than you would be able to do potentially in the data center. And then there's other advantages. I won't go into kind of into all those. I might come in a little bit later on those, but things like time spent more on development and innovation, going into new markets, new geographies for your organization. You can spin up your same services that have been kind of very successful and trusted in your existing geography, and if you're kind of expanding your business in another geography, you can do that very, very quickly. There's infrastructure tools that help you to build a new environment for a new geography with specific changes, very, very quickly in a matter of minutes if necessary. And I say I think probably the final thing for now I'd say is that the focus is on software. It's not on sort of hardware and resilience and things like that. So it's all about really having applications that are composable and orchestrated services.
Thank you very much for such detailed answer. Actually, I think you cover some topics we would like to discuss a bit later, but we will be get back to that topic as well. Thank you very much. And okay, let's go to our first speaker, Marius. Please tell us more about your experience, your thoughts about this topic.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Kate, for inviting me in this awesome panel with Adam and Richard. And very interested to speak on these topics. Once again, I'm from Societe Generale as Cloud Solution Architect, working in infrastructure solutions to be implemented for different business units within the company being a large one, a global one, with multiple very heterogeneous units. I'm also Microsoft MVP and Azure MVP, speaking of the cloud, but working lately also on AWS and also with the private cloud, so we're in the hybrid world like this. Maybe just a small detail is that I won't formally represent today my company Societe Generale. I'm not entitled to do that today, but I'm expressing my position as cloud solution architect with some experience in the field, I would say. So yeah, I believe my colleagues here mentioned a lot of interesting topics and exactly the key things that we are trying to address and trying to position when we speak about where to put your application. And these different criterias let you switch between on-prem and the cloud. But I maybe just want to go a bit further on that and speak about this notion of multi-cloud as you guys spoke about it. For me, we speak about multi-cloud as with at least, maybe this is the good number of 2 cloud solution providers from the public space and a private cloud also opportunistically being present in the company or in the companies for application perimeters that cannot go in some situations in the public cloud. And this is for me the multi-cloud, at least these 3 pieces together. And on-premises, the rest of the on-premises is what is like traditional computing or traditional infrastructure, if you want. And I won't go through all the things like security, compliance, agility, scalability, reliability, application lifecycle, CI/CD. There are many things, and then maybe I'll let you, Kate, to decline these things one by one if you intend to do that. I would say that if there are some things to make you decide on which side to put the things, definitely you have to put them on both sides. On the public cloud and on the private cloud, at least for the security and compliance reasons, for some assets that today cannot be on the public cloud, at least from the regulatory perspective. And then there is another important aspect, which is the lock-in, which frightens a lot of people, right? Being too dependent on a particular provider, no matter it's cloud provider or whatever else, is frightening every company, especially when business life depends on it. And this is why it's important to have this interesting choice, not to put all your eggs in the same basket, as you know, but put them, I would say, smartly, in a smart way, like not necessarily forced to use both Azure and AWS in the same application, could be absurd if it's not required by the application itself. But think of like departments, full departments or business units who will focus their competencies based on their maybe interest and culture on one cloud provider versus the other one, and depending also, as I said, on this kind of sensitive workloads and the lock-in that I spoke about it, some workloads would definitely go on the private cloud on premises in that extent. I don't know if you agree with me, guys.
Okay, thank you very much for your thoughts, because actually you just starting our discussion, because my next questions is actually several questions from my list. So we can start about, for example, how do you choose what way you proceed in your organization? So how can people who would like to understand which way better for the organizations can also proceed with this process of choosing something? Because some people don't understand like pros and cons, and maybe we can like describe how do you get to that point when you understand, okay, multi-cloud is best for decision for us, or like on-premise is best decision, or fully cloud is best decision. So you represent each like different companies, but mostly in enterprise, so like only in enterprises, as I can say, and you can cover like from your side, from your perspective. So if you can add something for those who would like to choose something from different approaches, please do.
I mean, I'll chime in on that one, because I both fundamentally agree with Marius's point regarding compliance and regulatory drives that might be imposed from your government, right? So in some cases, you may not have a choice depending on what your government is telling you based on what industry you're in, whether it's healthcare or finance, which are heavily government regulated, right? And so, but in many cases, I do also fundamentally agree with what Richard was saying about, say, things like security. So when we think about a cloud business as a general provider, their entire focus is on ensuring security of data, infrastructure, reliability, scalability, all of those nice ilities that we like to talk about, right? And so when you're beginning to think about whether it's on-prem, off-prem, or a little bit of both, it comes back to what are the use cases that is driving your organization, or what constraints do you have that you have to work around. And so, if I'm a general, Joe Blow, so to speak, right, general technology company, well, I may have no bounds. So in that case, I'd much prefer to go to on cloud, or I should say a cloud-based environment, and depending on what I'm trying to accomplish there, it may make a lot of sense. If I'm trying to drive a as a service platform or as a service piece of software, it may make total sense. If I don't have the ability to drive reliability and scalability and all of those abilities internally, especially if I'm a smaller organization, right? I just may not have the capital to do that. If I'm a larger organization, I'm a technology company, and also depending on when I grew up, meaning if I am a 30-year-old organization and I have already made a multi-billion-dollar investment in all of my capital from an infrastructure perspective, do I want to really begin to give that up versus pushing everything out to the cloud? Or do I want to begin to look at the cloud as a scalability option so that I no longer make investments, or I make hybrid investments between my capital expense versus my operational expense? And it comes back to, where are you from an organization growth perspective, and what are you ultimately trying to accomplish, and where are you trying to invest? I mean, I can speak for in multiple organizations that I've been at, both small and large. It all ultimately comes down to where you're trying to drive your organization from a mission and from a business perspective. And you can, believe it or not, it's much less of a technology investment rather than a business investment. It's much more of a business investment. And to be frank, I mean, whether it's cloud-based or not, it kind of doesn't really matter. What matters is what are you trying to do from a business value perspective? And Richard and Marius, what do you guys think about that?
I mean, I think for me, I think this is kind of a very wide sort of subject or question, so it's hard to kind of pin down exactly everything. I'll try and kind of hit on a few points in terms of kind of, should we go cloud, should we not go cloud? I think that's something that is born out of the business requirements, I think, as Adam said, and then you kind of make a decision there, and then IT obviously helps with that process. And IT continues that process with things like a competency center or a cloud center of excellence that kind of drives, the decisions. If it's empowered, it drives the decisions for sort of migrating to cloud, and kind of makes all the sort of major decisions: which partner, which consultancy to work with, how do we do, app migrations, which platforms, which technologies, and so on. And then you kind of maybe look at it from a business perspective and say, yes, what's the business trying to actually achieve here? Well, as we said, kind of compete in the market, innovation, bring products faster to the market, and so on. And that's all kind of, yes, cloud can tick all those boxes. But obviously, yes, there is other things like compliance, security, regulations, and so on. And where, again, cloud is kind of ticking a lot of those boxes at the moment. It's able to offer that, and certainly that's why we see governments kind of making the move to cloud and spending lots of money with the public cloud providers. There are other innovations as well. I mean, again, not necessarily kind of focusing on T-Systems, but we have in Germany, for example, we have a so-called sovereign cloud, and that really is a sort of a governance layer on top of the Google Cloud Platform, the GCP platform, and that really guarantees sovereignty of data and communication and packets and everything else on that system. So that basically kind of ticks the boxes for regulation and compliance and things like that. But also we're seeing innovation coming in on that aspect of it, to be included as part of the software that's actually being provisioned in the cloud. So things like technologies such as policy as code, that's kind of part of how you would develop new applications, cloud native applications, to include the policies that you require within the actual code itself, so that there is that kind of capability, and again, you can achieve the regulatory requirements and the sort of policy requirements, either for your own organization or just the market sector you happen to be in. In terms of how you move forward, there are set kind of steps that you can take. I won't go into all the details now, but you make your decisions based on the applications. You make them certainly on things like the lease on your data center. You certainly make them on things like the licenses that you have for very sort of established or corporate applications, such as Oracle database or SQL Server, or those kind of very hardcore kind of things. And you look at kind of all of those things. You look at subscriptions, you look at licensing. As Adam said, if you just bought a whole bunch of new Dell servers, you'd obviously want to take advantage of those, right? And you want to sweat those assets. But eventually, you would look at, if you are kind of going into cloud, you would look at not really furthering that sort of data center environment, and actually new applications sort of going to cloud, or ending up in some kind of a multi-cloud sort of environment, or even a cross-cloud environment. And we'll maybe come into cross-cloud a little bit later and explain that. But the point being is that there is different kind of approaches to that. There's assessments that we can do, and then we can look at kind of the low-hanging fruits. Now, that's for established enterprises, as Adam I think mentioned earlier on. For newer kind of companies or startups, I don't really see them doing anything in terms of their own assets. They just go straight to cloud. And again, there's a number of those sort of examples where they've kind of jumped into one of the stages, and I kind of define it as 4 stages of going to cloud. But they've kind of jumped into one of those stages immediately and kind of started their business, in the public cloud.
Mm-hmm. Marius, maybe you can add something.
Yeah, pretty much in phase with what you have mentioned. Just to have clearly the perspective is that we are talking about. Of course, the first is the radical decision at the beginning of the story, which is I have a case, business case, as Adam says. Shall I go to the cloud or not? Shall I go to which cloud, which public cloud in that case, which will be my decision? And from that point, from the fact that you have a business case with some timelines and some, time to market expected, with, I don't know, all the other constraints, which start not being anymore only business only. There will non-functional requirements that may come there, and at that moment you'll take a look and see, I believe, as per these requirements, the public cloud will go better than what I have on premises right now. On the contrary, if I do have particular constraints, for example, latency or something, I don't know, maybe workplace devices constraints, which are not possible to be, joining cloud infrastructure right away. I know there are solutions today, of course, but not possibly in that context. In that moment, the company will stick or will continue to invest on premises. But this is, once again, I believe, not once in a life decision, because the life means there are several big steps like decades and things like that, but still it's a very important decision ahead. And then choosing between the cloud providers, that's an interesting one, because theoretically we are supposed to say, every company, not necessarily the small ones, but bigger ones who have the meanings, will make this further assessment analysis very clearly at that stage, which cloud provider has best capabilities in this one and this one. And of course it does matter in terms with, for example, expecting particular maturity in let's say containers and Kubernetes services. Let's say this one. But what's interesting is that I found that often it's rather a matter of development culture in the team than definitive objective choice of comparative assessments between the service cloud providers. And from that point, many things are driven. And what's also interesting is from a certain point, we need to be very careful not to simply listen to developers go on, because it will be very difficult to put in place the right environment around their applications in that cloud that they want. So this is the interesting path I'm seeing. And from that moment, we have also decisions between maybe having multiple clouds, as I said before, in a larger company. And there's a decision, like a pattern for an application or application type, where to go, because you have the choice, which is a good thing. It costs money, but having that choice may give certain benefits to these applications, because they can choose where to put their workloads in which cloud, depending on, once again, mostly the same criteria. But there's no, let's say, one upfront decision, but it will be much more flexible at the moment of decision for that application.
Marius, it sounds like you need a cloud center of excellence.
We do have that.
Well, they should be making all the decisions on which platforms and what applications to migrate.
That's a good one. And actually, there are some patterns, and there are some procedures defined on that. But I believe there are still interesting signals coming from when you are in a heterogeneous environment, and you all want to be both very procedural, very clear, following all the things like you want, in the same time have some agility available in order for you to be dynamic in the market, and have these some branches which are given more agility for that. So in that extent, you see options to come, and you want to take that into consideration. So the point I've seen in regards to this idea of everything putting in cases, it works for between 50 to 70% of the 75% of the cases, and the rest, you need to leave that agility for the things to happen and to drive the change in your place also.
Thanks a lot.
And thank you for challenging that, Richard.
Yes, thank you. And actually, I have a question. We see, like, when we're talking with some companies, that some companies strictly prohibited, like, some cloud SaaS apps or services. And maybe you can tell from your perspective again, which services you can't move to cloud, for example, or in addition, which products you would not like buy to your organization because it's like cloud SaaS or something. What criteria you can apply for these two cases? So first, which services, like as functions in your companies, you can move to cloud because of like some cons on cloud environment, and like core services. And second is which SaaS providers can be prohibited in your organization as well because of that criteria, and which criteria. Really difficult question, I think. Even 3 questions.
Yeah, so to try to answer all 3. I would say from a prohibiting organizations or I should say, organizations that prohibit moving to the cloud, I would say at this point are, in my experience, are few and far between, right? Like I was saying earlier, I can imagine compliance and regulatory agencies not liking parts of say certain information being in the cloud, although we have to admit it is ultimately, or has a level of security, and organizations like Amazon are definitely working with compliance and regulatory agencies to make sure that they are meeting those standards, like HIPAA, for example. HIPAA is a standard for healthcare, right, in the United States. And so while AWS does offer a level of HIPAA compliance, there are still many hospitals and even insurance agencies which would prefer to keep all of their data and information on-prem. While they may have some off-prem levels of information that are in the cloud, there are still restrictions there. When we think about things like education, and we think about in the education field, I work for Boston University part-time as a part-time faculty member there. I teach a lot of online classes. All of those platforms are hosted in AWS. Now, you could argue that there is some pertinent information that's out there that might impose a security risk or issue. However, from an educational perspective, there is a general sense that hosting something like that in AWS is perfectly legitimate. So, I would say at this point, in my experience, there hasn't been necessarily any definitive restriction on, hey, you can't use cloud infrastructure at all. I would say the restrictions that I've seen is, well, you can only host so much in the cloud versus on-prem. And again, taking us back to that sort of hybrid model. But we all have to recognize that one of the things that drives many organizations today is data and the criticality of data and information. And what I think organizations are finding in general is that once that data is put into a public cloud provider, pulling that data out and trying to, say, switch providers is incredibly difficult. Not impossible, but incredibly challenging. And so, to what Marius had said earlier, by keeping your options open and not being locked down, I think is an incredibly critical point, because the reality is things will shift and change over time. Cloud providers will hold competitive advantage. Others will fall into competitive necessity, and you want to have those options. So depending on what level of investment you're willing to make in a cloud provider and the amount of data that you're willing to put into a public cloud provider is going to be based on what the organizational needs are. So I hope that answered at least some of your question, Kate.
Yes, definitely. Yes, definitely.
But I'd love to hear Marius and Richard's thoughts on on that.
I could maybe chime in with something. Yeah, I mean, I think the kind of the point about lock-in sort of has come up a couple of times. Obviously, there is that sort of potentiality if you sort of, as I think Adam said, Marius put all your eggs in one basket, and I do appreciate that. However, there is obviously ways that you can get around that, and you don't have to kind of get locked in. And that would be by using, not necessarily using the public cloud providers sort of tools and platforms for something in there as a service, but actually, building your own and creating your own using, open source and some of the other sort of enterprise-based, tools. Everything from really sort of building the cloud infrastructure to how you create your environment, in other words, in the cloud infrastructure, all the way to actually running your services. So I think in that sort of sense, it's very much the right workload for the right public cloud, and multi-clouds, as I said earlier, seems to be a kind of pretty much a default for most sort of enterprises. There's especially the larger ones where they can kind of invest in multiple sort of technologies and so on. The other approach is to obviously innovate your services. So by service I mean applications. And the way that you do that is by creating code that runs independently from the cloud. So you can run it, as serverless, for example, and that would not necessarily mean if there is no server running. There's always a server at the end of the stack somewhere, but it does mean that the code is independent in terms of how it operates, not dependent on a particular environment, for example, and that can be that can kind of free you up from that. The question on data, and we kind of came back to that via the security sort of door again. I think for data sort of security, there's two kind of things really. There's the we talked about the sort of the public cloud provider already doing security and kind of doing very high security, and Adam mentioned HIPAA and so on. It's kind of compliant with all that stuff. So that's kind of the public cloud providers' responsibility done. But this move to the cloud is a shared responsibility model. I'm sure if you Google that, you'll see that sort of diagram that goes from one end to the other. And as you kind of go more towards software, the enterprise's sort of responsibility becomes less. So you kind of putting stuff in, in Workday, for example, or Salesforce, well, they should really take care of everything for you, including securing your data, because you're not there to make the decision about how you encrypt your data and so on. It's just kind of an access and a sort of a utilization consumption sort of model for SaaS, for example, software as a service. But kind of infrastructure service, platform as a service, and so on, all the other kind of stuff in between. It's a shared responsibility model. So the enterprises can't get away with not doing any security or saying, well, it's all in the cloud, it's all HIPAA compliant, and we don't have to worry about it. No, for data specifically, you have to have a strategy, and that is part of what the Class Center of Excellence would drive and make decisions on in consultation with a partner. So a consultancy would be able to help with that. And there's, again, number of options there. And that kind of all, I guess, focuses around, what some sort of, it's almost an industry standard term around sort of cloud data management. And that, is about kind of how you back up and recover your data, how you secure your data, how you encrypt your data, how you sort of apply access to that data, how you replicate the data from one region to another, perhaps, that you want, and so on. So cloud data management is kind of the space or the technology that kind of looks at that, both from your infrastructure, so all of your Kubernetes clusters and the containers that are running your applications and so on, but also from the data that those services are actually accessing as well.
Thank you, Richard. Marius?
Yeah, speaking about parameters where the cloud is prohibited, you people already spoke about many of the things which are important in that extent. I would add one additional one on the table, which may be the competition on the same market for some companies. The example being not necessarily focused on that, but Amazon competing on both retail and cloud services fields. And so more or less obviously some retail company will avoid AWS for that reason, not necessarily all, but this is an interesting case. Coming back to the sensitive data, because this is the elephant in the room, right? So this is definitely a thing that is, the key decision point, whether you prohibit or not your application in the cloud at the initial, evaluation. And then there are some, or maybe eventually many things that may change on the road. In regards to the technology made available in regards to the approaches and the business cases, I would put two examples here. The first is what Richard mentioned is the appearance of the sovereign clouds or sovereign instances of the clouds, depending on the situation, which are once again regions or cloud providers which are based in a particular geographical or geopolitical area, and which respect all the constraints coming from that geopolitical area, data residing exclusively in the area, not responding to the Cloud Act constraints and other things like that. But that means that this kind of provider which respects this kind of things and is marketed as a sovereign or trusted cloud could host this kind of sensitive data that initially you prohibited for the cloud, right? So in that case, you may change your decision and go that way. Another thing is the technology evolution, and I would give the example of the confidential computing, which is a particular technology which lets you execute workloads in a enclave of memory which is encrypted at runtime, and which completes the whole chain of data moving and being at rest and then being executed and so on. So you have at the end of the day maybe all the bricks that you need to secure even sensitive data in the cloud. So that may be also a decision that help changing the situation for the sensitive data.